So this month has given us some good news and some bad news. The good news is Hillary Clinton didn't win. The bad news is a racist rapist won.
Yep.
And he's filling his cabinet with super villain level evil white men, dangerous people. The racist right has been emboldened. If you want more bad news. The Southern Poverty Law Center has reported in the 5 days following the election, 400 plus attacks and acts of intimidation and vandalism related to homophobia against Muslims, against immigrants, against black folks, and other marginalized people. But more good news, the left is beginning to respond in whatever way, in various ways. In contrast to the conciliatory attitude of Democratic leaders, tens, maybe hundreds of thousands have taken to the streets since the election to oppose Trump's agenda. And there's potential to build significant grassroots resistance. How did Trump win? Well, we believe working class people voted against their interests by voting for Trump. Also by voting for Clinton. About 25% of the electorate voted for Trump, which is down significantly, or I'm sorry, down slightly from recent Republican presidential elections. About 26% of the electorate voted for Clinton, which is down significantly from recent Democrat shares of the electorate. So Trump didn't win. Hillary lost. Right? The Democrats threw this away. The capitalist class chose Clinton to be the next executor of their affairs. They backed her almost without exception. But the election unexpectedly got away from them. The Democratic Party squashed a challenge by a wildly popular left populist, who we all have our criticisms of. This is not an endorsement of him. And they wound up with a right populist that few truly loved. Clinton was a dutiful neoconservative servant of capital. I'm saying was as if she's off the map already, and I hope she is. And she cloaked herself in a veneer of liberalism that would silence opposition from the left and make her a more effective leader. For the capitalist class, a loss by the candidate that they preferred was not the worst case scenario. It's preferable to a win by a candidate that might empower working class claims once in office, working class demands. Yeah. I think they don't know what to do now that this guy got in, but they will figure it out. The capitalist class, the political and military establishment will figure it out to some extent. Trump's victory should be laid at the feet of the Democratic Party, who did not address the legitimate economic grievances that Trump built his claim of, his campaigner, and will not address, no doubt. And quite the opposite, as with Clinton. With no liberal solutions, especially after Bernie's campaign was finally shut down, Trump channeled white working class discontent into scapegoating and fear-mongering, into racism, xenophobia, and nationalism. As Marxists, we believe this is what racism, xenophobia, and nationalism were designed to do. To prevent us from recognizing our real allies and enemies, to falsely associate white workers with the almost entirely white ruling class, and to tolerate the hand that workers have been dealt because at least we don't have it as bad as the people just below us in the social order that they've created. The liberals and left have problems. The left suffers from a lack of a structural analysis, much of the left. A focus on individual behavior over social dynamics and collective action. There are lots of bad ideas coming out of academia that are radicalizing and undermine our solidarity, specifically post-structuralism, postmodernism, and identity politics. By contrast, solidarity must be our guide. An injury to one is an injury to all. Whether each of us faces a particular form of oppression, our fates are connected. We cannot continue to accept and replicate the divisions that the ruling class has imposed upon us. This is not to gloss over the terrible realities of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, Islamophobia, ableism, and more, all of which Trump has brought to the surface. Quite the opposite. It is to form like fingers, a fist, to punch those realities in the goddamn teeth. There's a couple of chairs up here if y'all are interested. Sorry, it's a little scattered. More problems on the left include what I like to call leftier than thou condescension, exclusivity, elitism, moralism, and self-righteous condemnation of anyone who doesn't have it all figured out, that uses the wrong word, whatever it is. I don't think we're going to win by forming a cool kids club, and that's what we want to do is win. Lesser evilism has been utilized. Lesser evilism has been utilized by the Democrats for so long and is so deeply entrenched in the minds of voters that it has enabled the Democrats to assume the votes of anyone slightly left of center and chase votes to the right, moving their politics and the politics of the nation steadily rightward for many decades. Decades of capitulation to the right got us to November 2016, where a neoconservative faced off against a right-wing populist. Hal Draper, in a 1968 essay called Who is to be the Lesser Evil of 1968, between Nixon and Humphrey, the presidential election, he said, under the pressure of bureaucratic statified capitalism, liberalism and conservatism converge. That does not mean they are identical or are becoming identical. They merely increasingly tend to act in the same way in essential respects where fundamental needs of the system are concerned. We can't fight the right with liberalism. Liberalism is its partner in crime, not its opponent. The capitalist class and the political and military establishment will attempt to rein Trump in. But after his unexpected electoral success, the Republicans will also attempt to normalize his repulsive politics. And they're already getting plenty of help from the liberal media and Democratic politicians. Democrats are promising to cooperate with the person they were calling un-American, which is a weird insult coming from a so-called socialist, in my mind. Dangerous, unfit to rule, and fascist. This is what they do. We should view the Democrats and Republicans as a single party, the party of the capitalist class, with a vulgar wing that is overtly servile to capital, and a kinder, gentler wing that feigns fealty to ordinary people. In 1848, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels wrote, "The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie." The day after Trump elected, Obama said, "Remember that we're actually all on one team."
Boo.
In the coming months, there will be a rush by well-meaning progressives, by people who are entering politics for maybe the first time, to cling to the Democratic Party, to the NGO industrial complex, to pacifism, to electoral politics, as a refuge from reaction. We must remain critical of liberalism and distinguish it from genuine leftism. At some point, the pendulum will swing back the other way to whatever limited extent we can call a return from reaction to neoliberalism a swing. The Democratic Party will attack left rhetorically in order to position itself to return to power and continue to serve capital, and we can't fall for it. We should attempt to convince people that only an embrace of genuine leftist political action and politics, of grassroots, independent, militant, working class organization can truly stem the tide of reaction and of neoliberalism. That means recognizing the Democratic Party as rotten to the core, as a vehicle of the ruling class, worthy of no support, none of our support. There will also be a section of people who are looking to get off the reformist electoral carousel, as well as people who are getting politically active and involved for the first time. I believe we should support such radicalization and welcome it with open arms, not with self-righteousness or ridicule as is so common. We should also beware of sectarianism. Of course, we want to grow our individual organizations and argue for our particular politics. I mean, we're right, and everybody just doesn't realize it yet, right? But I truly believe that building a vibrant, heterogeneous, strong left is more important. We leftists should work together and support each other's work in order to create a real fighting force and a convincing alternative to liberalism and the right wing. So where do we go from here? The Black Lives Matter leadership recently stated, the work will be harder, but the work is the same. And that's it. That's it right there. But what's the work? Well, I'm going to use 3 magic words to organize my thoughts here. They overlap and intersect, but taking them one at a time. Educate, agitate, organize. We must educate ourselves and each other. I consider political development to be one of our most pressing needs. Speaking about the Black Liberation Army in her autobiography, Assata Shakur said, "On the whole, we were weak, inexperienced, disorganized, and seriously lacking in training." I've got one more chair here too. And I can sit, people can sit on the stage here.
There's another one over back here.
Sure. I'm so glad that we have 2 big chairs. On the whole, we were weak, inexperienced, disorganized, and seriously lacking in training. But the biggest problem was one of political development. There were sisters and brothers who had been so victimized by America that they were willing to fight to the death against their oppressors. They were intelligent, courageous, and dedicated, willing to make any sacrifice. But we were to find out quickly that courage and dedication were not enough. To win any struggle for liberation, you have to have the way as well as the will. An overall ideology and strategy that stems from a scientific analysis of history and present conditions. So to me, that's political development right there. Without political development, we can't help but be bewildered by our historical predicament. Without an understanding of history and theory, we can't make good strategic and tactical choices. Without class consciousness, we can't know who our allies and enemies are. And we have very real enemies. Schools, the news and entertainment media, churches, and other bourgeois institutions will never provide us with the education we need for this task. Quite the opposite. They exist to confuse us, assimilate us to our exploitation and oppression, and to dampen our resistance. Agitate. We got to agitate. We got to stir shit up. We have to. That means shining a light on injustice and oppression, making people pay attention, and bringing them into the struggle. As Marxists, we believe the highest form of struggle is collective mass action. I mean every one of those words, collective mass action. Strikes, occupations, demonstrations, and direct action, and uprisings, also known as riots. We consider electoral politics to be the lowest form of struggle. That may sound strange in a country where politics means voting every few years and listening to Rachel Maddow and John Oliver rants, but it may be the lowest form of struggle, but it's also a significant and important one that we shouldn't ignore. Labor organizer Mark Brenner recently stated that defensive victories, much less forward progress, in the Trump era will require more audacity and breaking a lot more rules. Frederick Douglass said a long time ago, not last week like Mark Brenner, power concedes nothing without a demand. But we don't engage in struggle simply to beg for concessions from those in power. We do it to transform ourselves and each other, our consciousness. to demonstrate our power to ourselves and each other, and to those with the economic and political power, to train ourselves to run society, and to build our strength to move beyond struggles for reforms to revolutionary struggle. And we got to organize. That's where the rubber meets the road. We must build an activist fighting left based on mass movements, unions, and democratic independent organizations. By independent, I mean divorced from the capitalist parties and sustained by members not from funding from outside or above. Nobody who can afford to fund our organizations wants us to pursue our self-emancipation, because they know we're eventually coming for them. The working class may suffer from a lack of class consciousness, but the ruling class does not. So I believe we need a political party by, for, and of the working class. That's one. We need militant self-defense groups to defend oppressed peoples. The wave of reaction after Trump's victory has made that increasingly urgent. And we need explicitly revolutionary organizations, which is what the ISO is trying to grow. These groups, all of these groups, should represent the full, beautiful diversity of the working class with regard to race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, sex, religion, nationality, and more. We must fight the right under Trump, and in doing so, connect existing struggles and movements into a common project of resistance. We can look for inspiration to the Black Lives Matter movement, the Verizon strike, the National Prison strike, and the heroic indigenous resistance at Standing Rock.
Mm-hmm.
All our grievances are connected and share a common root, capitalism. We need to keep in mind all the good things we have come from resistance, not from politicians.
Mm-hmm.
They've come from fighting. To paraphrase Martin Luther King, the arc of the moral universe is long, but we can bend it toward justice. It's not going to bend itself. So, I don't know what all of this means specifically and in detail, and I believe we have to figure that out together. So let's start on.